2024 was a pivotal year for green energy in Europe. The European Electricity Review found for the first time solar power overtook coal as an energy source for generating electricity, accounting for 11%. Solar is growing in every EU country, and more than half now use either little or no coal. Clean energy accounted for nearly three-quarters of EU power generation, and use of renewables reached 47%, both record highs, powered by the continued growth of solar power and a recovery in hydropower. And emissions from the EU's power sector fell to half the 2007 peak, as use of fossil fuels fell to the lowest level in 40 years. Well, let's talk now to Dr Chris Rosslowe, who's a senior analyst at the energy think tank Ember, which carried out this review. Good to see you, Chris. Thanks for joining us. So we're seeing from your review there that solar power has overtaken coal for the first time. Are we now seeing the beginning of the end for fossil fuels and electricity generation?
Thank you. I think it is clear that fossil fuels are losing their grip on European energy. And indeed, I think coal power is near the end. Coal power is increasingly concentrated in just two European countries, in Germany and Poland. And as you were saying, it's now being pushed down into sixth place as an EU power source. It was as high as third place as recently as 2019. The EU still uses more gas than coal for power, and the decline is slower in gas, but we have seen 5 consecutive years now of declining gas power, which does indicate that's becoming a structural decline as well.
So as well as some of these declines, we've seen growth in renewables. Has that meant that Europe's now in a place where it's more energy secure?
I think that can definitely, that's definitely the case, yes. Of course, if you look back over the last few years, there was a major event when Russia attacked Ukraine, and it left the EU scrambling to find alternative gas supplies. But because of the growth in wind and solar, it actually didn't need to find as much gas from elsewhere as it was importing from Russia. So we estimate that the growth in wind and solar, just in the 5 years since the start of the European Green Deal, has helped the EU avoid 59 billion euros worth of fossil fuel imports. So that it would have had to import roughly a fifth extra gas on top of what it did just for power generation if it wasn't for the growth of wind and solar over that period.
Well, let's talk about that Green Deal. Is that what's made the difference in growth of renewables?
It definitely set the direction of travel. It increased Europe's climate ambition, it increased Europe's very high-level targets, and then it was over to national governments to set the kind of wheels in motion on the ground, if you will, by introducing renewable policies, support policies. But really, I think going back again to the gas crisis a few years ago in 2022, when the cost of gas soared as a result of that, it really profoundly shifted the economics in favour of wind and solar power. And that remains the case today. They're very competitive. They're the cheapest forms of energy, much cheaper than gas generation today, because gas is still relatively expensive, even though it's come down a bit since those highs.
So lots of positives around renewables then, but do you think Europe's doing enough to transition to them when you look at other places like China, for example, which are going much further and much faster?
So I think Europe has a genuine case for being a clean power leader in its power sector. As you were mentioning at the top there, more than 70% now of Europe's electricity comes from clean sources. China is still much more dependent on coal on the one hand, but on the other hand, you're right that China is investing huge sums into clean energy, which are really changing the landscape in China. So there's a slight difference there in the comparison. Is Europe doing enough in other ways? I think when we look at solar power, the success there is very clear, and that is on track for, let's say, European energy targets. With the wind power sector, however, we are seeing growth. It's not accelerating at the rate it needs to, and that's really important because wind power and solar power are actually very complementary to each other. They generate energy at different times of day, different times of year. And also, as I was mentioning earlier, wind power is also significantly cheaper than gas power, so it will help to improve energy affordability in Europe if Europe can accelerate that growth in wind power too.
Chris, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That's Dr Chris Rosslowe from Ember.